Hi guys, I'm back. I'm here to record the part two of that podcast that I posted yesterday. Just to catch you up, in case you clicked on this one and not part one for whatever reason, it was recommended to me by one of my viewers. I'll put their comment up here very briefly. Go to pause and read it again, but I did read over it in the previous episode. Go and check them out. They have a lot of good comments under my videos, very insightful. So basically, we are watching this because really the things that are going to be talked about in this podcast, it seems could be the origin of fat acceptance, and it's not a social media phenomenon, but actually a top-down phenomenon. It's coming from these behavior clinics. Now, when I say behavior clinics, once again, let's go over our vocabulary. If you see this word in any variety, the word is now behavior. We don't want YouTube to come for us. If you see this word, I'm going to say DIET, okay? And I'm going to take those words out every time they say them in the podcast, and I am going to just allow the context to fill in the blanks for you. And I don't think the context is that clear. I will put the word on the screen. So if you missed something, you're like, hey, what was that? It is probably on the screen. If not, then I was hoping you would get it. Just know it's probably one of those two words. But yeah, let's jump right back into it. Let's pick up where we left off. We have Aubrey Gordon on this podcast for this behavior clinic, and they're basically talking about how mean everybody is because they're fat and how you can be healthy and fat at the same time. Obesity is a mean word. People don't become fat because of overeating, apparently, and we're going to see what else they talk about. We're going to see where it goes. Come with me on this journey, okay? Let's hope we all survive.
I mean, I would say, like, similarly for me, I would say a lot of people carry sort of trauma and hard feelings about their bodies and how their bodies were treated and regarded growing up. And I think what that means is often for people who don't wear plus sizes, I think they imagine that to be the sum total of sort of issues with body image, right? Is sort of like, oh, people have said hard things to me, right? And that felt really hurtful. And that's as far as I go in the conversation about body image, right? Growing up as a fat kid, it wasn't just about saying mean things to me because I was a fat kid. It was about getting sent to fat camp, which is, for folks who are unfamiliar, I think, like, pretty clearly just a way of giving kids, and in some cases, like, a pretty clear cut of kids happening.
I'm going to say something that's going to sound a little controversial. I don't think she's wrong. I think when you remove kids from their safe environment, which is home, and you put them in a new environment where suddenly they're having to go by all these different rules, they're having their energy intake restricted, it can be very traumatizing. If you watch Alex's channel, he'll always talk about how these behaviors are genetics plus trauma, essentially. And I could see that being a very traumatic thing. Like, even if you're not going to fat camp, going to regular camp can be weird, and camps can be environments, abusive either due to bullying from other peers or because your parents aren't around to protect you from adults who might act inappropriately, to say the least. And I know there's people in my life who've had that happen to them at camps. And so I can totally see that being the case. I don't know how prevalent fat camps are anymore. If you guys know of any, let me know. Is that still a thing? I could definitely see it being a thing in the 90s and the 80s. There was even that movie Heavyweight, which was about a fat camp, right? I think it had Ben Stiller in it, and they like revolted and tied him up and just ate all the food they wanted, had snacks, etc. And very interesting portrayal of what was kind of going on at the time in a very extreme way. So yeah, I will give it to her there that I think those kinds of environments were not conducive to losing weight and could result in inadvertent harmful things happening, which could lead to behaviors. But so much of what they talk about is always about what happened in their childhood. That's why I'm asking if you guys know anything about that stuff today. Please let me know, because I don't think most people think of fat camp as like an acceptable thing today as much as we did like 20, 30 years ago. But they will do this a lot, where they will take instances from childhood and apply it to themselves today. And how old is Aubrey Gordon? Is she like almost 40 years old? Is she 40 years old? All I know is that she is older. She's likely a millennial. She's still using the things that happened to her in childhood to make excuses for herself today. That to me says a lot more. That just, to me, says there's something going on up here that is causing that inability to move on is troubling, right? Like, I would say go to therapy, but I think most therapy would reinforce this stuff because that's kind of like what they're being taught these days, as apparently what we're going to learn here in this podcast. But even regular therapy that isn't weight related, a lot of it can be very self-reinforcing of those negative beliefs.
In those spaces, right? It was about being put on, not only on, but also being put on fen, which was a drug that was pulled from the market because it stopped people's hearts. It was about as Kara.
Okay. I looked it up and yeah, it caused apparently pulmonary hypertension, which is like hypertension in your lungs, and it affected the heart as well. But I'm guessing it stopped the heart because of what was going on in the lungs, and probably wasn't the best drug. But it seems like it was also like a stimulant. And I know they have like different versions of that drug today, which are like phentermine, which I'm pretty sure is like a less fen-phenny version of it because it has the word fen in it, right? And that is a stimulant. I was on that like a long time ago, and it did help me lose weight, and then I regained it. I don't think it's because of the phentermine. That had like there was a whole other reason behind that. But I just remember when I did take it at one point, it like gave me so much energy, right? I'm not on any weight loss drug now. The only medications I'm taking is for my thyroid, my migraines, my acid reflux, and I take like supplements. Occasionally like naproxen or something for, go along with the migraines or the pain I'm having, and occasionally methocarbamol for my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is those are the pain related things. And I haven't had to take as much muscle relaxers or naproxen since losing weight, which is great. I mean, I take them now very rarely versus when I first started losing weight. Like, oh my gosh, it was daily, sometimes twice daily, just because I was in so much pain from just carrying my larger body around. Yeah, so that one, I do think if you're put on that as a kid, especially, like that is crazy. And I'm pretty sure I once listened to a video, I think Alex did, where she talked about how she got put on fen-phen, and basically her mother drove to the middle of nowhere, got to a shady doctor. The shady doctor is the one who gave it to her, right? And yeah, I'm perfectly willing to acknowledge that Aubrey went through a whole host of like traumatic incidents in her childhood. Now we're going to watch her projected onto every other fat person in the world.
I mentioned like this whole idea of like not fitting, right? Like not being able to get a choir dress that fit unless you had one special made, and not being able to get a uniform size for a sports team, right? Like that sort of at every turn, you're not only not expected, but you're not welcome, right? And the only way to get welcomed is to transform your body into something it has not ever been. And that is a real hard way to grow up in the world, knowing that the only way, or being told that the only way that you can be accepted is if you change almost completely. I mean, like, I am also a queer person who worked on campaigns around therapy, and I will tell you the similarities there are often really striking, right?
I think that's really disingenuous to say. It's the same thing of like using people of color for your argument of why you can't lose weight. Now you're using like what, gay people for your argument for not losing weight. It's like, let's just use all these minority and like significantly more oppressed populations to make our point. That's crazy to me. Okay. I also think it's just extremely on brand. And I know I bring up this same term all like every single time. White women. I don't mean to say like I don't know, I'm one of them, right? But it's maybe because that's why I need to call it out more, right? Because I am one of them. But we have this problem of just using other people in like basically as meat shields in order to make our point and in order to get away with things. And believe me, I think they would be the first people she threw under the bus as soon as it became inconvenient to her. Like, I don't think that her empathy in the situation is real at all. And I think bringing them into this conversation is frankly offensive. Like, silo off your issue, please. It's always about the intersectionalities.
There's no evidence that that kind of transformation is really possible for most people. But there's a deep investment in making sure that people who are outside of the norm are sort of face some punitive circumstances for being outside of the norm. And that feels really bad and gross. Feels really bad and gross.
I have so many directions I could take this because there's so many pieces. But just to insert my little anecdote as we converse, I was listening to, I want to say it was either NPR or New York Times, and it was one of their responses to the AAP guidelines that had come out. And the individual who was being interviewed was a medical correspondent. And towards the end, they finally started to talk about weight stigma in children. And they were like, but isn't weight stigma a problem? And she was like, absolutely. And she kind of clarified. She said, and that's why supporting these kids with weight loss measures will be beneficial. So then they won't have to endure weight stigma. And that's like exactly what you're talking about of being like queer and being told you shouldn't be queer. So let's go through therapy because that's not stigmatizing. And
That is so not the same thing. And like I said, it's frankly offensive. Your sexual orientation is, for the most part, an immutable characteristic, okay? Argue about it in the comments if you so wish, okay? I don't care. Now, obviously, we could say sexuality is a spectrum, and you might fall somewhere on that spectrum, maybe a little bit this way, a little bit this way, but a lot of people fall into a binary, right? You're heterosexual or you're homosexual, and then you have another population that's bisexual, right? And the bisexual is even then it's the binary, right? If you're going one way, you're going this way, right? And yeah, it is a problem telling people that you should just not be gay. Just try not being gay, right? That's what they used to say. Like, have you tried not being gay? That was the whole thing in the 90s, that we were like in the early 2000s, of when people were really campaigning like either for or against gay marriage. But we now know it's essentially an immutable characteristic. Okay, for most people, it's an immutable characteristic. It's more mutable if you're bi, but not so much if you're gay or straight. Whereas fat, as we all know, is absolutely 100% a mutable characteristic. So telling somebody to be just not gay is definitely not the same thing as telling somebody to be just not fat. And honestly, if you want to bring weight stigma into the equation with kids, sure, we can talk about that. Reducing fat would help reduce weight stigma. But how about just reducing fat for health reasons? Isn't that good enough? Oh, wait, I forgot. You can be fat and healthy at the same time. That's what they're saying, right? And the thing that bothers me about this is it's very much playing with children's lives, because being fat in childhood is so indicative of being fat later in life. It doesn't usually go fat in childhood to thin in adulthood. I mean, that is typically the narrative that we will see like in movies, but that's not what the data shows us. That you learn these DIET habits in childhood. And by DIET, I don't mean reducing anything about your intake. What I mean is like habitual EAT ing habits. It's very hard to unlearn those things in adulthood, because as we all know, being fat is caused by how much you're eating. And so if you're telling these kids it's okay to be this way and they go on this way into adulthood, you're setting them up for significant failure, okay? We might reduce weight stigma. I don't think it's ever going to completely go away, because the fact of the matter is that health doesn't care about these societal feelings, okay? Let's just look at what happened with the, COVID. I don't even know sure if I can say that word right now. I'm just spelling things out for you guys. And how people were harmed by that. You were significantly more harmed if you were overweight or obese. You are more likely to become unalived from that virus than if you were of a normal weight. So let's say we do have another instance like we had a couple of years ago. Do you really want people to have to lack defense against those things? You want children to be set up for failure against their health? Like, just shove weight stigma to the side. Yeah, it's not nice to bully people, especially not kids. It's not nice to put kids through torturous things like that. But my goodness, you still have to face reality.
And so when you describe that, I'm like, man, the whole fat camp mentality is not gone. Like, it is still there. And there is still such a medical perspective that, well, stigma will decrease if you just fit into this size. And it's just heartbreaking to hear that y'all have been through this. Millions of people have been through this experience, and it continues to be really challenging.
Yeah, it sure does. And it just feels like, there's sort of this idea that like we've moved past anti-fatness, or we're moving past anti-fatness, or something like that. And I feel like I see that from such a dramatically different perspective than so many folks, which is essentially like, I don't think we've moved past it. I think we're entrenching it more, right? That those AAP guidelines are about giving very new drugs with very little research behind them to children, to like actual children.
I will agree with her there. I don't think kids should be on those drugs. That is the better point. If you shouldn't be giving these drugs that have significant side effects to children. I think the pharmaceutical industry is out of control when it comes to that. I'm very wary of even giving things like Ozempic to adults. I think you really have to be in a bad place to get it. It should not be given to people who are just slightly overweight at all. But if you're super morbidly obese like I am, and you're really struggling to get through it, first of all, take care of your mental health. Make sure you're not going to regain the weight because of your behaviors, right? And then if you need it to help you get down to that level, because contrary to popular belief, when you are bigger like that, you are significantly hungrier. And it has some part to do with the fact that you need more calories to sustain your weight, but a lot of it has to do with inflammation. Your inflammation is blocking your hunger cues. Okay. It's blocking those cues that tell you that you're full. You've likely developed, if not gotten that way, in part due to hormonal issues. Those hormonal issues do exactly the same thing. They don't give you accurate hunger cues. And that was basically what I suffered from, was having those hormonal issues, high inflammation. And so I would eat until I was full, but it was always at least 300 to 500 calories over how much I should have been eating. So you end up gaining like a lot of weight very quickly. Like if you're only eating 500 calories over what you should be eating, but you're doing that daily, that's basically gaining a pound a week, right? And that could be like 50 pounds in a year. And that's a lot of weight to gain in a year. But you don't understand why it's happening, because you're like, but I'm only eating until I'm full. And so it's kind of wild to think that way, because you don't think that maybe 500 calories could be a lot, but that could just be like, it's literally could be like 5 tablespoons of butter. And you might think, oh, who's eating 5 tablespoons of butter? Well, you went for your meal, you cooked it in butter, and that butter is calories. Or you're like really hungry on the way home from work. You're like, I can't think. I am so hungry. I've really stressed myself out all day long today. My cortisol is pumping because I needed it to get through. My adrenaline's pumping. All the stress hormones are out of control at the moment. So you pull through a drive-through and you get like a cheeseburger. And you're thinking, well, it's only a cheeseburger. It's only this big. But that cheeseburger is like 700 calories, right? It's or 500 calories. It's a lot of food, and you don't realize it. You have a soda with it. It seems like portion size. It seems like it's not that much, but calories. Knock my headphones out again. But calories wise, it's a lot, and so it's very easy to gain weight. We don't even realize it. The processed food being higher in calories than what we need is part of it, when it doesn't have to actually be that higher of calories, especially if you make it at home. So there's lots of factors that go into this. But yeah, I wouldn't want to give Ozempic the children. So I agree with her there. Okay, there's some things that she gets right. The other things that she says for the reasons for it, I don't necessarily agree with her much.
About giving weight loss surgery to preteens, right? Like, it is rough out there. Those are big, dramatic decisions to make with children's health. And again, it feels like rather than like we're moving past it, it feels like we're regressing real hard right now.
100%. Because like when I think about, the kinds of campaigns that are going on right now, and I also think about my own childhood, right? I mean, when I was 12 years old, I was, and like that's when my kicked into high gear, right? I wasn't really just snacking here and there. I mean, I was in a legitimate. Meanwhile, like I have lipedema, and I didn't know it. I didn't even know it until like 2 years ago. And so I've had.
So I had to edit out some of those words there. So basically, she was assaulted in the sex way. It instigated her behaviors. That's totally believable. I totally believe her when she says that. It's always interesting to me how they can acknowledge these behaviors, but then not see how, regardless of your trauma, that response to the trauma and the behaviors that you're doing are unhealthy as well. Because if you listen, she made the argument earlier that you could be fat and healthy at the same time. But then now she's openly acknowledging here that what got her there was significant over EATING. I think that's interesting.
Sleeve surgery, and it didn't do much. And I've had weight loss drugs over the years. I had Meridia, I had like all these different interventions, the powders, the pills, the programs, and none of them really made a dent in my body. Or if they did, it was temporary. Sorry, if they did, it was temporary, and it just came back, with a vengeance. So when I think about like how this is some campaign that promises to change the trajectory, well, what are we not considering? Like what's going on in each individual child's life? And maybe, maybe they're just a bad kid.
Yeah,
like
totally.
maybe this is just their body, and it's not going to react in a way. But the promises of those campaigns are just so problematic.
Okay, so she's saying maybe they're just a fat kid, maybe this is just their body. But then she openly acknowledges, as I said, that she engaged in behaviors. And she didn't directly say they made her gain weight, but we all know that's likely what led to it. It's very strange to hear her say these things and not put those things together. That maybe, because she was a kid who engaged in those behaviors, that there are other children who are engaging in those behaviors. And maybe that should be the thing that we're tackling, and not telling them, hey, it's okay to be this way. It's like the symptom is normal, but we acknowledge the cause exists. It's such a weird, inverted way of thinking.
Well, and also, like, when do we ever respond to stigma or bullying or, like, in any way punching down with the people who are getting punched are probably the ones who need to do the changing, right? Like, rather than the people doing the punching, it's very strange to me, particularly with the AAP guidelines, that there is this acknowledgement of weight stigma, there is this acknowledgement of anti-fatness, and there is zero plan to do anything about it. There are no action steps about how weight stigma is going to be combated, aside from, as you noted, just like make fat kids thin, and then the stigma ceases to exist, which no, it does not. And also, how would that happen, team? Scientifically, where are we going with that? How's that gonna be delivered?
That's right. We need a project manager for that.
Oh.
Action steps.
Yeah.
And I should probably clarify for our listeners what the AAP is. And so,
Okay, I'm going to stop it there for now, and we'll watch that in part 3. She's going to talk about what the AAP is. It's a really long section, and so I would rather listen to it in one whole part rather than have to cut halfway between it. But I think it's very interesting so far. The first part of this podcast we watched was all about setting up the narrative of fatness. And this one dove more into their childhood trauma and how society perceived their fatness and affected them. And I think it's very interesting that this is being hosted by a behavior clinic, right? Like, let's look this place up really quick before we even film part 3. Okay, so it's a national leader in behavior treatment programs by state. They have them in a lot of states. Don't have them in my state, thankfully. They treat all these different kinds of behaviors. They take insurance. 73% of patients no longer report significant behavior symptoms. Now, I really have to question just how true that is, because if you weren't having the symptoms of the behavior where you eat AT in excess, you would be losing weight. Now, perhaps if you have the opposite end of the spectrum, you would be gaining weight. And I think if you saw the comments and if you listened to the comments I read last time in the last video from the person who recommended this to me, they're admitting that this is the one in excess is the one that's most common, right? And yet they're also telling you it's okay to be fat, even though you've engaged in these excess behaviors. And this is a clinic that's supposed to be helping people, and they're hosting this podcast. It's a lot to chew on. It's a lot to think about. I'm going to jump right into part 3. I might just film all this in one night in one go. And yeah, catch me the next time. This is kind of it is definitely eye-opening, because as that commenter said, like, if everybody's going here, all these people on TikTok who are claiming to have those behaviors, but they're always claiming it's the reduction side, not the excess side, right? Even though we know that's not true. It's no wonder, they must be getting reinforced by these people. Okay, okay. Interesting. Well, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.